All right, so today we're diving into some pretty intense international affairs stuff, specifically stuff in the Middle East. We've got a whole stack of articles here, and things are getting really complicated,
hmm
especially with all this stuff with former President Trump.
Yeah, it's definitely like a turning point right now. I mean, like Trump is really trying to get back on the world stage. And like with such a bold statement, it's definitely going to change things.
Yeah, okay, so there's this one article that really caught my eye. Trump warns all hell to break loose if U.S. hostage is not released. So it's about this recent thing he posted on Truth Social, where he's demanding that America get its hostages back from the Middle East, like right now. And he's basically saying that if they're not free by the time he takes office again in January, then there are going to be some serious consequences. I mean, wow. Is it just him trying to sound tough, or is there more to it?
Hmm. That's interesting you picked up on that because the timing here and the way he's saying it, it's all really important. Like this is the first big statement Trump has made about international stuff since he got reelected. And he's coming out swinging, using really strong language, almost threatening.
Yeah, definitely sounds like classic Trump to me. I was going to make these big, bold statements,
Yeah.
grabbing all the attention, setting the agenda. But what does this actually mean, like practically? What's he hinting at here?
Well, if we look back at how Trump handled foreign policy before, especially in the Middle East, he's shown that he's not afraid to use the military, even if it means going it alone. Remember those airstrikes in Syria and him pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this statement could be a sign that he's ready to take that same hardline approach again if he doesn't get what he wants.
Man, that's a scary thought. And it's all happening at the same time as this horrible hostage situation.
Yeah.
We've got another article here about it. Omer Nutra, an American-Israeli soldier. He was confirmed dead after being held hostage by Hamas ever since those attacks back on October 7th.
Oh, yeah, right. Just awful. It just makes everything even more complicated now.
Hostage situations have always been a really sensitive issue for the U.S., I mean, historically. They've shaped a lot of big foreign policy decisions, and they really influence public opinion.
Yeah, for sure. This article mentions how President Biden offered his condolences and that he's promising to keep working to get the other hostages back. But compared to Trump's fiery stuff, Biden's approach seems a lot more careful.
It's like night and day, isn't it? Biden's administration is all about diplomacy, working with other countries. But Trump, he seems to prefer that confrontational style, doing things his own way. So this difference in approach, I mean, it could really change how this whole crisis unfolds.
So with these two totally different approaches, I'm curious what the rest of the world is thinking about all this.
Well, everyone's definitely paying attention. I read this article where Piero Cipollone, an economist at the European Central Bank, he's worried about what could happen to the economy and global politics if things keep getting worse. Okay, so break this down for me a little. What kind of fallout are we talking about here? Like, what does this mean for everyday people?
Well, we've got to remember that the Middle East is already a really unstable place. If things escalate even more, it could have effects all over the world. It could change oil prices,
Yeah.
mess up trade routes, even break up political alliances. It's a really delicate situation.
So even though this feels really far away for a lot of us, it could still affect us here at home.
Exactly. The economic impact alone could be huge. We could see oil prices going way up, supply chains getting disrupted, maybe even a bigger conflict that pulls in other countries. These are things that could have a real impact on our daily lives.
Wow. So this isn't just some news story happening on TV. It's something that could actually affect all of us.
Exactly.
And of course, there's the human cost too.
Yeah.
All the families affected by this hostage situation, we can't forget about them.
Absolutely. And, if we take a step back, this whole situation really highlights these challenges and tensions that have been brewing in the Middle East for decades. Things like political instability, religious extremism, economic inequality, and it just goes on and on. These are all things that contribute to the volatile environment we're seeing today.
Yeah, and the thing is, there are no easy answers here. This is a really complicated crisis with like deep roots in history, and it involves all these complex geopolitical issues. So whatever path the U.S. takes, there's a real risk of things backfiring.
Yeah, it feels like whatever we do, or even if we don't do anything, it could have huge consequences, like we're walking a tightrope.
Exactly. And this isn't just about this one crisis. It really shows us these bigger challenges and tensions that have been simmering in the Middle East for decades. All this instability, religious extremism, the economic inequality, these are the things that make the whole region so volatile.
Okay, but let's bring this back to our listeners for a second. Why should they care about this? I mean, it's happening on the other side of the world. How does it actually affect them? That's a great question. And even though this might feel like a distant conflict, it could actually affect all of our lives. Think about it. Oil prices could go up. Global supply chains could get disrupted. There's even a chance of a bigger conflict that pulls in other countries. These aren't just abstract ideas. They could have real consequences for us here at home, affecting things like our personal finances, our travel plans, even just our ability to get the things we need.
Wow, so this isn't just some news story playing out on TV. This is something that could really hit close to home for all of us.
Exactly. And then there's a human side of things, too. Innocent people are caught in the middle of all this. People are dying. Families are being torn apart. It's a human tragedy, and we can't forget about that.
It's easy to get lost in all the political debates,
Yeah.
but we have to remember the real people who are suffering because of this situation.
Absolutely. And if we think about this on a bigger level, this situation raises questions about America's role in the world, the use of military force, and all the complexities of international diplomacy. These are things we as citizens need to think about and talk about, even if they're uncomfortable or difficult.
Yeah, it's a lot to process. But I think these conversations are really important. We need to understand all the different sides of this situation and form our own informed opinions.
I totally agree. And that's really what we're trying to do here on the deep dive. We want to give you the context, the analysis, and all the different perspectives to help you make sense of this complicated world.
So we're not here to tell anyone what to think. We just want to give you the knowledge and tools you need to think for yourselves.
Exactly. And even though things might feel overwhelming sometimes, there are always things we can do, even small things, to make a difference, like staying informed, donating to humanitarian organizations, or just talking to our friends and family about these important issues.
That's a good point. It's easy to feel powerless when faced with these huge challenges.
They absolutely can. And another thing to think about is how the media is covering this. We're bombarded with information from all sides, so it's important to be careful about what we're reading and watching. Look for credible sources, consider different points of view, and don't be afraid to ask questions.
Yeah, you're right. It's not just about what we read. It's about how we think about it.
Exactly. Critical thinking is so important, especially with all the information overload these days.
Okay, so we've talked about the potential consequences of all this, both for the world and for us personally. We've touched on the human cost and the need to stay informed and engaged. But looking ahead, what are some of the key things that could determine how this whole situation plays out?
Well, one big factor is the upcoming election, how this crisis is handled. It could become a major issue in the campaigns, and whoever wins the election, that could really change how the U.S. approaches the Middle East.
Right. A new president could mean a whole new set of priorities when it comes to foreign policy.
Exactly. Another thing to watch is how the other major players in the region react. Countries like Iran, Saudi Arabia, Israel. They all have a lot at stake here, and what they do could either make things worse or help calm things down.
So it's not just about what the U.S. does, it's also about how these other countries respond to the situation.
Precisely. And of course, we can't forget about groups like Hamas. It's hard to predict what they'll do, and their actions could have a big impact on how things unfold.
It's like a giant chess game, with all these different players making moves and trying to outmaneuver each other.
That's a great way to put it. And we have to remember that this is a constantly changing situation. Things are happening all the time, and new developments could pop up at any moment.
So it's really important to stay informed, keep up with the news, pay attention to what these different players are doing, and be ready for anything.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid to look for different points of view. Read articles from different news sources, listen to podcasts with different perspectives, and talk to people who might see things differently than you do.
That's a great reminder. It's so easy to get stuck in our own little bubbles.
Exactly. But when we expose ourselves to different viewpoints, it helps us understand these complex issues in a more nuanced way. And that kind of understanding is crucial if we want to make informed decisions and be part of finding real solutions.
So much to think about, huh? As we're wrapping up this deep dive, what are some of the big things you hope our listeners will take away from all of this?
You know, I think one of the most important things to remember is that this whole situation, even though it's so complicated, it really shows us how connected the world is. Like what happens in the Middle East, it can have effects that reach all of us.
Yeah, that's right. It's not just some conflict happening far away. It's something that could have real consequences for all of us.
Exactly. And that brings us to another important point. We have to stay informed and engaged. We have to understand what's happening, see things from different perspectives, and really think about the consequences of different actions.
And that means looking beyond just the headlines.
Right.
Like really digging deeper. I know it's easy to get overwhelmed with all the information out there, but we can't just give up.
Definitely not. We have to be proactive. Look for information from different sources, talk to people, ask questions.
Yeah, and it's okay if you're wrestling with these tough issues. If you're not sure what the right answer is, there isn't always a clear right or wrong. But when we engage with these topics, when we talk about them and try to understand different viewpoints, we can help create a more informed and thoughtful conversation.
Exactly. And that's what we're all about here on the Deep Dive, giving you the information and tools you need to understand these complicated issues and to come to your own conclusions.
So as this situation keeps developing, over the next few weeks and months, we encourage you to keep learning, explore different perspectives, and stay involved because your voice matters, your understanding matters, and your actions matter, even the small ones. They can make a difference.
They really can. And here's one last thing to think about. What could happen in the long run? What are the consequences we haven't even thought of yet? Keep those questions in mind as you follow the news. And keep exploring this important topic.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the situation in the Middle East. We hope you found it helpful and interesting. Don't forget to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more deep dives into all sorts of complicated topics. And if you like this episode, give it a like. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.